Hello there and welcome to Before Law, where forgotten truths meet the courage to question everything we think we know. Tonight, we're not going to talk about the latest archaeological discovery or another dusty museum exhibit. Instead, we're going to ask something that makes historians uncomfortable, something that challenges the very foundation of how we see ourselves in the grand timeline of existence. What if the story they've been telling us is incomplete? What if civilization didn't begin with us? I don't mean ancient aliens building pyramids or lost continents filled with crystal technology. I mean something far more unsettling and far more plausible. What if advanced human civilizations rose and fell long before we learned to write, long before we built our first cities, long before we even knew we had a history to record? And what if the evidence has been staring us in the face this entire time, dismissed, buried, or simply ignored because it doesn't fit the narrative we've constructed about our own importance? Before we dive deep into this rabbit hole, I'd love to know where you're joining us from tonight and what time it is where you are. Are you settling in for sleep in Stockholm, or perhaps watching the sunrise in Singapore? Drop a comment and let's see how far this question reaches across our world. And if this kind of deep dive into the mysteries of our past intrigues you, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. It helps this quiet corner of curiosity reach other minds ready to question what they've been taught. So find a comfortable spot, let your thoughts slow down to the pace of geological time, and prepare to see human history not as a straight line of progress, but as a cycle that may have repeated more times than we dare imagine. The story we tell ourselves about civilization is remarkably simple. It goes like this. Humans wandered as hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years, barely scraping by with stone tools and animal skins. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something magical happened. We discovered agriculture, settled down, built cities, invented writing, and began the long march toward the modern world. It's a clean narrative. It's comfortable. It makes us feel special. But what if it's wrong? Not wrong in the sense that these things didn't happen, but wrong in assuming they only happened once. What if the timeline of human achievement is not a single ascending line, but a wave pattern with peaks and valleys we've forgotten or never bothered to look for? Consider this. Anatomically modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years. That's 200 millennia of brains identical to ours, capable of everything we can imagine and create. Yet we're supposed to believe that for 95% of that time, these brilliant minds accomplished essentially nothing. That they sat around campfires for 188,000 years, never once figuring out that seeds could be planted intentionally, never once organizing into complex societies, never once developing technologies that could leave lasting marks. The mathematics alone should make us suspicious. If it took us only 12,000 years to go from farming to space travel, what were we doing for the other 188,000? Were our ancestors really that different from us? Or have we simply lost the evidence of what they achieved? This question becomes even more intriguing when we look at what archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, a period around 40,000 years ago when human behavior suddenly exploded in complexity. Cave paintings appeared. Sophisticated tools emerged. Jewelry and art flourished. Music instruments were crafted. It wasn't a gradual development. It was an explosion of creativity and innovation that happened, in geological terms, overnight. What caused this sudden leap? The standard explanation involves cognitive evolution, the development of modern language, or social changes. But there's another possibility that historians rarely discuss. Maybe this wasn't the first time. Maybe it was just the first time in a very long while. You see, the archaeological record has a dirty secret. It's not actually a record of everything that happened. It's a record of what survived. And survival, especially over tens of thousands of years, is extraordinarily rare. Most of what humans create doesn't last. Wood rots. Fabric decomposes, metal corrodes, Even stone structures crumble and get buried under layers of sediment. If you took our current civilization and fast-forwarded 50,000 years, what would remain? Some foundations, perhaps. A few ceramic fragments. Maybe some glass that's been turned into sand. The vast majority of our achievements, our art, our literature, our music, our entire digital world would vanish without a trace. Now imagine trying to reconstruct our civilization from those fragments. Future archaeologists might conclude that we were a simple people who lived in concrete boxes and made pottery. They certainly wouldn't guess that we'd mapped the human genome, split the atom, or walked on the moon. This is the problem with deep time. It's not just that things get old, it's that they disappear. The Earth is constantly recycling itself through erosion, sedimentation, volcanic activity, and tectonic movement. The surface we live on today is not the same surface our ancestors lived on. Much of it has been ground up, melted down, and reformed multiple times over. But the disappearance of physical evidence is only part of the challenge. There's also the question of where we're looking and what we're looking for. Most archaeological work focuses on the last 10,000 years. The period we already know was significant. Very little attention is paid to the deeper layers, the older deposits, the places where evidence of earlier civilizations might hide. And when anomalies do appear, when artifacts or structures don't fit the accepted timeline, there's a strong tendency to explain them away rather than explore what they might mean. This isn't necessarily conspiracy or cover-up. It's simply how science works. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and when evidence is scarce or ambiguous, the conservative interpretation usually wins. But conservation can become blindness. When we're so committed to a particular story about our past that we can't see alternatives, we risk missing the most important discoveries of all. Consider the growing list of archaeological sites that don't quite fit the timeline. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its massive stone pillars carved 11,000 years ago, before agriculture was supposed to exist. The precision-cut blocks at Pumapunku in Bolivia, fitted together with a tolerance that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The massive stones at Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 1,000 tons, moved and placed with techniques we still don't fully understand. These sites aren't proof of lost civilizations, but they're cracks in the narrative. They suggest that our ancestors were capable of far more than we've given them credit for. And if they could build these monuments, what else might they have accomplished that simply didn't survive the passage of time? The question becomes even more intriguing when we look at the genetic evidence. Recent studies of human DNA have revealed something surprising. Our species went through several population bottlenecks, periods when the total number of humans dropped dramatically. Some of these bottlenecks coincide with known catastrophes like volcanic eruptions or ice ages, but others remain unexplained. What if some of these bottlenecks represent not just random disasters, but the collapse of organized societies? What if they mark the end of civilizations that rose and fell before we learned to record their stories? The Toba supervolcano eruption 74,000 years ago is often cited as one such bottleneck. This massive explosion, the largest volcanic event of the last 2 million years, would have plunged the world into a volcanic winter lasting years. It's estimated that the human population dropped to as few as 10,000 individuals worldwide. But here's what's interesting. Genetic analysis suggests that humans had already spread across much of the world before this disaster. They were in Australia, Southeast Asia, and possibly even Europe. That level of global distribution suggests not just wandering bands of hunter-gatherers, but organized, seafaring peoples with the technology and knowledge to navigate vast distances. What kind of societies were these? What did they know about navigation, shipbuilding, and survival that allowed them to spread so far? And what was lost when their world ended in ash and darkness? The same questions arise when we look at other historical catastrophes. The Younger Dryas event, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that began around 12,800 years ago, coincides almost perfectly with the end of the last Ice Age and the beginning of agriculture. Was this timing coincidental, or did the climate catastrophe destroy existing civilizations, forcing survivors to start over with farming and settled life? Evidence for this possibility comes from an unexpected source: flood myths. Nearly every culture on Earth has stories of great deluges that destroyed previous worlds. These myths are remarkably consistent in their details, describing advanced peoples who were wiped out by rising waters with only a few survivors remaining to repopulate the Earth. Mainstream historians have long dismissed these as either metaphors or cultural memories of local floods. But what if there's something more? What if they're fragmented memories of actual global catastrophes that destroyed advanced civilizations? The end of the last ice age involved a massive, rapid rise in sea levels as glaciers melted. This wasn't a gradual process. It happened in pulses, with some coastal areas being inundated in a matter of decades or even years. If sophisticated societies had developed along these coastlines, they would have been completely erased, leaving only scattered survivors to carry their stories inland. Today, those ancient coastlines lie under hundreds of feet of water. The continental shelves where our ancestors might have built their greatest cities are now on the ocean floor, covered by sediment and coral growth. We've barely begun to explore these submerged landscapes, and when we do, we find tantalizing hints of what might lie beneath. Underwater archaeologists have discovered structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean that appear to be artificial but are far older than any known civilization. These finds are often dismissed as natural formations or misidentified features, but they raise an uncomfortable question. What if we've been looking for our past in the wrong places? The resistance, it's psychological. The idea that we might not be the first, that our civilization might be just the latest in a long series of rises to these possibilities, isn't just scientific, that we're not the culmination of human development and fools, challenges our sense of uniqueness and progress. It suggests, but just another chapter in a much longer story. This resistance runs deep in academic culture, where careers are built on established paradigms and revolutionary ideas are often seen as threats rather than opportunities. Graduate students learn early not to challenge fundamental assumptions if they want to advance in their fields. Funding goes to research that builds on accepted theories, not to wild expeditions searching for lost civilizations. The result is a kind of institutional blindness, where evidence that doesn't fit the established timeline is either ignored or explained away. It's not malicious, but it's effective. Alternative theories are marginalized, relegated to the fringes where they can be safely dismissed as pseudoscience. But what if the fringes are where the most important discoveries are waiting? What if the reluctance to seriously investigate these possibilities is causing us to miss the greatest archaeological revelations of our time? The stakes couldn't be higher. If advanced civilizations did rise and fall before us, their story could hold crucial lessons for our own survival. How did they develop their technologies? What caused their collapse? What knowledge did they preserve? And what was lost forever? These aren't just academic questions. In an age of climate change, resource depletion, and technological acceleration, understanding the full pattern of human civilization could be the key to avoiding the same fate that befell our predecessors. The evidence is fragmentary, scattered, and often ambiguous. But it's there, waiting in the deep layers of archaeological sites, in the genetic patterns of our DNA, in the flood myths that echo across cultures, and in the underwater mysteries that lie beneath our rising seas. The question isn't whether we can prove that advanced civilizations existed before us. The question is whether we have the courage to seriously look for them, and what we'll do with the answers when we find them. The silence around these possibilities extends beyond academia into the very institutions we trust to preserve and interpret our past. Museums, those grand repositories of human achievement, display their collections in carefully curated timelines that reinforce the accepted narrative. Ancient pottery here, Bronze Age tools there, all arranged to tell the story of steady linear progress from primitive to sophisticated. But walk through any major museum and notice what's missing. Notice the gaps, the unexplained jumps in complexity, the artifacts that don't quite fit their assigned time periods. These anomalies exist in every collection, quietly challenging the neat chronology presented on the placards. Take the Antikythera mechanism, that impossibly complex bronze device pulled from a shipwreck off the Greek coast. For decades after its discovery in 1901, it sat in storage, too advanced for its supposed age to make sense. When researchers finally decoded its purpose, they found a sophisticated analog computer capable of predicting astronomical events with remarkable precision. The device dates to around 100 BCE, yet incorporates gear trains and mechanical principles that weren't supposed to be rediscovered until the Renaissance. How do we explain such leaps? The standard approach is to treat them as isolated geniuses, one-off innovations that appeared and disappeared without broader context. But what if that's exactly backward? What if these artifacts represent not anomalies, but glimpses of a technological tradition that was far more advanced and widespread than we've assumed? Consider the precision of ancient stone cutting. From the granite boxes in Egyptian pyramids to the perfectly fitted walls of Inca fortresses, we find evidence of techniques that seem to surpass even modern capabilities. The tolerances are impossibly tight, the surfaces mirror smooth, the joints so precise that not even a knife blade can slip between them. Modern attempts to replicate these achievements using period tools have largely failed. The best explanations involve theoretical techniques that would have required generations of specialized knowledge to develop and refine. This suggests not isolated experiments, but established traditions of engineering and craftsmanship that took centuries or millennia to mature. Yet where are the schools that taught these techniques? Where are the workshops where such precision was developed? Where are the hundreds of practice pieces that would have been necessary to achieve such mastery? The absence of this supporting infrastructure is puzzling unless much of it has simply been lost to time. The problem becomes even more intriguing when we consider the global distribution of these advanced techniques. Similar precision cutting appears in Peru, Egypt, India, and Easter Island, locations separated by vast oceans and supposedly isolated from each other for thousands of years. The conventional explanation involves independent invention, the idea that humans naturally develop similar solutions to similar problems. But the similarities go beyond general approaches to specific techniques and design elements that appear across cultures with no known contact. The megalithic structures of different continents share not just the use of massive stones, but particular methods of shaping, moving, and placing them that seem to follow common principles. This raises uncomfortable questions about the level of contact and communication that existed in the ancient world. If isolated cultures could develop such sophisticated techniques independently, why did they then abandon them? Why do we see evidence of advanced capabilities in the distant past, followed by apparent technological regression? The pattern suggests cycles of development and loss that don't fit our model of steady progress. Instead of civilization advancing in a straight line, we see peaks of achievement followed by dark ages where knowledge was forgotten and had to be slowly rediscovered. History is filled with such cycles on a smaller scale. The fall of Rome led to centuries where European societies forgot how to build roads, aqueducts, and concrete structures that had been commonplace under the empire. The collapse of the Maya civilization left behind cities in the jungle that later inhabitants couldn't explain and didn't try to replicate. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw the simultaneous downfall of multiple advanced societies across the Mediterranean, plunging the region into a dark age that lasted centuries. If such collapses could happen to civilizations we know about, what about the ones we don't? How many times has human knowledge advanced to remarkable heights, only to be lost in catastrophes that left no written records? The geological evidence suggests the answer might be many times. Earth's climate has been remarkably unstable over the past 100,000 years, with rapid shifts between ice ages and warm periods that would have devastated any established societies. The transition from the last ice age alone involved massive floods, rising sea levels, and dramatic changes in weather patterns that would have challenged even modern civilization. Archaeological surveys of now submerged continental shelves have begun to reveal the extent of what was lost. Sonar mapping shows vast areas of the ocean floor covered with geometric patterns that look artificial, but are far older than any known civilization. These formations lie under hundreds of feet of water, placing their creation during periods when sea levels were much lower than today. The reluctance to investigate these underwater anomalies reveals another aspect of institutional resistance. Underwater archaeology is expensive, technically challenging, and often inconclusive. It's much easier to focus on sites on dry land where excavation is straightforward and funding is more readily available. But this preference may be causing us to miss the most important archaeological sites of all. If advanced civilizations did develop during earlier periods, they would most likely have been concentrated along coastlines where resources were abundant and trade was possible. These locations are now underwater, effectively placing entire chapters of human history beyond our reach unless we make extraordinary efforts to explore them. The few underwater sites that have been investigated have yielded tantalizing but incomplete results. Structures off the coast of Japan appear to show right angles and stepped formations that could be artificial, but their age and origin remain controversial. Similar formations near India and the Mediterranean raise the same questions without providing clear answers. The ambiguity is frustrating, but it's also revealing. If these sites were clearly natural, they would be easy to dismiss. If they were obviously artificial, they would revolutionize our understanding of the past. The fact that they fall into a grey area between the two suggests that we may be looking at something genuinely unprecedented, something that doesn't fit our existing categories. This ambiguity extends to other types of evidence as well. Genetic studies have revealed patterns in human DNA that suggest our species went through multiple population expansions and contractions over the past 100,000 years. Some of these events coincide with known environmental catastrophes, but others remain unexplained. What's particularly intriguing is that some of these genetic bottlenecks appear to have been followed by rapid population expansions and technological innovations. It's as if surviving groups emerged from catastrophes with new knowledge and capabilities that allowed them to quickly spread and flourish. The pattern suggests that rather than starting from scratch after each collapse, survivor groups may have preserved crucial knowledge that gave them advantages over truly primitive populations. This preserved knowledge could explain the sudden appearance of sophisticated techniques and technologies in the archaeological record. But preserving knowledge across catastrophic dark ages requires more than just individual memory. It requires institutions, traditions, and social structures dedicated to maintaining and transmitting information across generations. The existence of such institutions in prehistoric times would imply levels of social organization far more complex than we typically associate with hunter-gatherer societies. Evidence for such organization appears in various forms across the archaeological record. The construction of megalithic monuments required not just technical knowledge, but the ability to organize large numbers of people over extended periods. The astronomical alignments found at many sites suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics that would have taken generations to develop and refine. Yet these achievements appear in the record seemingly out of nowhere, with little evidence of the gradual development that should have preceded them. It's as if the knowledge was already there, waiting to be applied when conditions permitted. This raises a profound question about the nature of human civilization. Are we really the culmination of a long, slow climb from primitive origins? Or are we the latest iteration in a cycle that has repeated many times before, each time building on the preserved knowledge of previous civilizations that rose and fell in ages we've forgotten? The implications of this possibility extend far beyond academic archaeology. If advanced civilizations have indeed risen and fallen before us, their experiences could provide crucial insights into the challenges we face today. Understanding how they developed their technologies, how they organized their societies, and ultimately how they failed could help us avoid the same fate. But accessing this knowledge requires us to abandon our comfortable assumptions about human uniqueness and progress. It requires us to seriously consider that we might not be the first to reach our current level of development, and that the path forward might be illuminated by looking backward into the deep shadows of our forgotten past. The resistance to this investigation isn't just scientific skepticism, it's existential fear. The fear that we might not be as special as we think, that our achievements might not be as unprecedented as we believe, that our future might not be as secure as we hope. But perhaps that fear itself is the most important discovery. Perhaps the recognition that civilizations can rise and fall, that knowledge can be lost and recovered, that human achievement is fragile and cyclical, is exactly the wisdom we need to navigate the challenges ahead. The question isn't whether we can prove these ancient civilizations existed. The question is whether we can summon the courage to look for them seriously, and whether we can handle the truth about our place in the long story of human development when we find it. The evidence for these cyclical rises and falls becomes even more compelling when we examine the knowledge systems that somehow survived the gaps in our historical record. Consider the profound astronomical understanding embedded in structures that predate our supposed discovery of complex mathematics by thousands of years. The builders of Stonehenge knew not just where the sun would rise on the summer solstice, but could predict lunar eclipses decades in advance. The creators of the Mayan calendar developed a system more accurate than the one we used until recently, tracking celestial cycles that span thousands of years. The architects of ancient Egypt aligned their pyramids to stellar positions with a precision that requires not just observation, but generations of accumulated data and mathematical sophistication. This isn't the kind of knowledge that emerges overnight from primitive societies. It represents centuries, perhaps millennia, of careful observation, record-keeping, and mathematical development. Yet it appears in our historical record as if it materialized from thin air, with no visible foundation of gradual discovery and refinement. The traditional explanation is that these achievements represent the work of exceptional individuals or small groups of priest astronomers working within otherwise primitive societies. But this explanation strains credibility when we consider the scope and precision of what was accomplished. Creating accurate astronomical calendars requires not just brilliant individuals, but entire institutions dedicated to observation, calculation, and record-keeping across multiple generations. Where were these institutions? Where are the thousands of intermediate calculations, the trial and error experiments, the gradual refinements that such achievements would have required? The absence of this supporting infrastructure suggests either that it existed but has been lost, or that the knowledge came from somewhere else entirely. The possibility that it came from earlier, more advanced societies becomes more plausible when we examine the global nature of these achievements. Similar levels of astronomical sophistication appear independently across cultures that had no known contact with each other. The precision is too consistent, the techniques too similar, for this to be coincidental. It's as if there was a common source of knowledge that somehow reached diverse cultures across the globe, or as if multiple societies were drawing from the same pool of inherited wisdom preserved from an earlier age. Either possibility suggests a level of global connection or knowledge preservation that doesn't fit our current understanding of prehistoric human societies. The pattern extends beyond astronomy into other fields of knowledge. Ancient metallurgy shows similar leaps in sophistication that seem to come from nowhere. The Bronze Age didn't gradually emerge from increasingly sophisticated stone tool use. Instead, complex alloys and advanced casting techniques appear suddenly in the archaeological record. as if the knowledge was already fully developed when it was first applied. The same phenomenon appears in agriculture, where sophisticated crop breeding and irrigation systems seem to emerge fully formed rather than through gradual experimentation. The early farmers of Mesopotamia weren't experimenting with wild grasses to develop wheat. They were working with already highly modified crops that showed the results of generations of selective breeding. This suggests that either the development of these technologies happened much earlier than we think, or that the knowledge was preserved and transmitted by groups that maintained it through dark ages when civilization had otherwise collapsed. Either possibility challenges our assumptions about the linear progression of human development. The preservation of knowledge across catastrophic periods would have required not just individual memory, but sophisticated systems of education and cultural transmission. Oral traditions, symbolic systems, and ritualized practices that could maintain complex information across generations of disruption and displacement. Evidence for such systems exists in the form of mystery schools, secret societies, and esoteric traditions that claim to preserve ancient wisdom. While much of what these groups teach has been distorted or corrupted over time, the underlying structure suggests organized efforts to maintain knowledge across historical discontinuities. The Egyptian mystery schools, the Mesopotamian priesthoods, the Celtic druids, and similar institutions across cultures all claim to be guardians of ancient wisdom that predated their own civilizations. They spoke of golden ages when knowledge was more complete, of catastrophes that destroyed earlier worlds, and of their role in preserving fragments of what had been lost. Modern scholars tend to dismiss these claims as mythological, but what if they contain kernels of historical truth? What if these institutions really were the remnants of more advanced educational systems that survived the collapse of earlier civilizations? The possibility becomes more intriguing when we examine the knowledge these groups actually possessed. Despite being dismissed as primitive by later civilizations, they demonstrated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering that often surpassed what was publicly known in their time. The builders of Gothic cathedrals, trained in guild traditions that claimed ancient origins, achieved structural innovations that weren't understood by contemporary scholars and couldn't be replicated when the guild knowledge was lost. The medical practitioners trained in traditional systems often achieved results that baffled university-educated physicians, who dismissed their methods as superstition. These examples suggest that parallel knowledge systems existed alongside official academic traditions, preserving techniques and understanding that had been developed in earlier periods, but weren't part of the mainstream intellectual culture of their time. The fragmentation of knowledge into esoteric traditions would be a natural consequence of civilizational collapse. When institutions fail and educational systems break down, knowledge survives in whatever forms can adapt to the new conditions. Complex understanding gets compressed into symbolic systems, technical procedures become ritualized practices, and theoretical frameworks transform into mythological narratives. Over time, the original meaning may be obscured or lost, but the essential information persists in forms that can be transmitted across generations, even when the broader cultural context has disappeared. This would explain why we find sophisticated knowledge embedded in seemingly primitive traditions, and why ancient cultures often claimed their wisdom came from even more ancient sources. The implications of this pattern extend far beyond academic archaeology. If civilizations have indeed risen and fallen in cycles, leaving behind fragments of their knowledge to seed future developments, then our current understanding of human potential may be severely limited. We assume that our current level of technological and scientific development represents the pinnacle of human achievement, the culmination of a long, steady climb from primitive origins. But what if we're actually recovering knowledge that was already known in previous cycles? What if our greatest discoveries are actually rediscoveries of principles that were understood and applied by earlier civilizations? This possibility is supported by the strange way certain breakthrough discoveries seem to emerge. Often, crucial insights appear not through gradual research and development, but as sudden flashes of understanding that seem to come from nowhere. The discoverers themselves frequently report that they felt more like they were remembering something than learning it for the first time. Tesla spoke of receiving his inventions in visions that seemed to come from outside his conscious mind. Darwin described his theory of evolution as arriving fully formed, as if he had simply recognized a pattern that was already there. Einstein reported that his understanding of relativity came through intuitive leaps that he later had to work backward to justify mathematically. While these experiences could be explained as the subconscious mind processing information in ways the conscious mind doesn't recognize, they could also represent access to knowledge that exists in forms we don't yet understand. If information can be preserved across civilizational cycles through mechanisms beyond our current comprehension, then breakthrough discoveries might represent moments when individuals somehow access this preserved wisdom. The resistance to investigating these possibilities runs deeper than scientific skepticism. It touches on fundamental questions about human nature and our place in the cosmos. If we're not the first to reach our current level of development, if our achievements are not unprecedented, then our sense of progress and uniqueness is called into question. This challenges not just academic theories, but the entire narrative structure that gives meaning to modern civilization. We tell ourselves that we're the culmination of human development, that our technology represents genuine progress, that our future is bright with unlimited potential. But if history is cyclical rather than linear, if civilizations rise and fall in predictable patterns, then our confidence in continuous progress becomes harder to maintain. The fear that drives resistance to these ideas is ultimately the fear that we might not be exempt from the forces that destroyed earlier civilizations. If advanced societies have collapsed before, they could collapse again. If knowledge has been lost in the past, it could be lost again. If we're part of a cycle rather than a unique moment in history, then our future is far less certain than we like to believe. But perhaps this recognition, uncomfortable as it may be, is exactly what we need to navigate the challenges ahead. Understanding that civilizations are fragile, that knowledge can be lost, that progress is not inevitable, might be the key to ensuring that our particular iteration of human development survives and flourishes. The investigation of these possibilities requires not just new archaeological techniques and funding for underwater exploration, but a fundamental shift in how we approach the past. Instead of looking for evidence that confirms our existing narrative, we need to be open to discoveries that challenge our assumptions about human development. This means taking seriously the anomalies that don't fit our timeline, investigating the underwater sites that might hold crucial evidence, and considering the possibility that oral traditions and esoteric knowledge systems might preserve genuine historical information rather than primitive mythology. Most importantly, it means overcoming the institutional and psychological resistance that keeps us from asking these questions seriously. The stakes are too high for academic comfort zones and career considerations to determine what we're willing to investigate. The search for evidence of previous civilizations isn't just an interesting archaeological puzzle. It's a quest for understanding that could reshape our entire conception of human potential and our relationship to the deep patterns of history. The knowledge we might recover could provide crucial insights into sustainable development, social organization, and the preservation of wisdom across generational and cultural boundaries. The silence around these possibilities has persisted long enough. The time has come to seriously investigate whether we are truly the first advanced civilization, or whether we're the latest chapter in a much longer story of human achievement and loss. The evidence is fragmentary and often ambiguous, but it's there, waiting in the deep layers of archaeological sites, in the genetic patterns that trace our species' journey through time, in the sophisticated knowledge systems that seem to come from nowhere, and in the underwater mysteries that lie beneath our feet. The question isn't whether we can prove these earlier civilizations existed beyond all doubt. The question is whether we have the intellectual courage to look for them seriously, and the wisdom to learn from what we find. The answers we discover might be uncomfortable, challenging our assumptions about progress and uniqueness. but they might also be exactly what we need to ensure that our own civilization doesn't join the ranks of those that rose to great heights, only to be forgotten by the societies that came after. The investigation continues, and the deepest mysteries still await our exploration. The deeper we venture into this investigation, the more we encounter a peculiar phenomenon that should give us pause. It's not just that evidence for earlier civilizations is scarce, it's that when such evidence does surface, it tends to disappear again with remarkable consistency. Not through some grand conspiracy, but through the quieter mechanisms of academic dismissal, institutional neglect, and the simple passage of time. Take the case of the giants. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspaper accounts across America regularly reported the discovery of unusually large human skeletons. These weren't isolated incidents or tabloid sensationalism. They were documented finds reported by local museums. Universities were remarkably consistent. Skell researchers and government surveyors. The descriptions settle remains of individuals 7, 8, even 9 feet in height, often found in burial mounds alongside artifacts that suggested sophisticated cultures. Where are these skeletons now? The standard explanation is that they were misidentified, exaggerated, or simply never existed in the first place. But the sheer volume of reports, their geographic distribution, and the detailed measurements provided by credible sources suggest something more systematic was occurring. These weren't random hoaxes or measurement errors. They represented a pattern of discovery that, if taken seriously, would have significant implications for our understanding of human variation in the past. The disappearance of these specimens raises uncomfortable questions about how archaeological evidence is curated and preserved. Major institutions like the Smithsonian have vast collections in storage, with only a fraction displayed publicly. What criteria determine what gets preserved and what gets discarded? What happens to finds that don't fit established timelines or challenge accepted theories about human development? This selective preservation extends beyond individual artifacts to entire categories of evidence. Petroglyphs and rock art that depict scenes inconsistent with our understanding of prehistoric life are often dismissed as symbolic rather than representational. Stone tools that show unexpected sophistication are explained as anomalies rather than indicators of widespread technological knowledge. Architectural features that seem too advanced for their supposed age are reinterpreted as natural formations rather than human constructions. The pattern suggests a systematic bias toward evidence that supports established narratives and against discoveries that might require fundamental revisions to our understanding of the past. This isn't necessarily intentional suppression, but it has the same effect. Potentially revolutionary evidence disappears into storage rooms, academic footnotes, and forgotten museum collections. Consider the mystery of precision drilling in ancient stones. Across various archaeological sites worldwide, researchers have found evidence of holes drilled with remarkable accuracy into granite, basalt, and other extremely hard materials. The precision of these holes, their perfectly circular cross-sections and smooth walls, suggests the use of advanced drilling technology. Yet these finds date to periods when such technology supposedly didn't exist. The conventional explanation involves primitive drilling techniques using copper tools and abrasive sand, applied with enormous patience over extended periods. But experimental archaeology has struggled to replicate these results using proposed ancient methods. The holes show characteristics that are difficult to explain without invoking technologies that weren't supposed to have been developed for thousands of years. Rather than explore these implications, most researchers simply note the anomaly and move on. The evidence is acknowledged, but not investigated deeply enough to challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities. This pattern of superficial acknowledgement, followed by intellectual dismissal, appears repeatedly in archaeological literature. The same phenomenon occurs with evidence of ancient precision cutting. From Egypt to Peru to Easter Island, we find examples of stonework that achieves tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. The surfaces are so smooth they appear polished, the joints so tight that insertion of a knife blade is impossible. Modern attempts to replicate this precision using proposed ancient techniques have largely failed to achieve comparable results. Yet rather than seriously investigating how such precision was achieved, most researchers focus on demonstrating that it was theoretically possible using primitive tools, regardless of whether such demonstrations actually match the archaeological evidence. The need to maintain established timelines takes precedence over understanding the full scope of ancient capabilities. This selective investigation extends to dating methods as well. When radiocarbon dates or other chronological indicators support established timelines, they're accepted without question. When they challenge those timelines, they're often dismissed as contaminated samples or measurement errors. The bias isn't in the scientific methods themselves, but in how the results are interpreted and what kinds of follow-up investigation they inspire. The result is a self-reinforcing system where evidence that fits established narratives gets thorough investigation and wide publication, while evidence that challenges those narratives gets minimal attention and quickly disappears from active consideration. Over time, this creates the impression that the established narrative is strongly supported by evidence, when in fact, potentially contradictory evidence has simply been filtered out of the discussion. This filtering process becomes even more problematic when we consider the role of funding in archaeological research. Projects that promise to illuminate known civilizations and confirm established timelines are much more likely to receive financial support than expeditions searching for evidence of unknown or controversial possibilities. Graduate students learn early that career advancement depends on working within accepted frameworks, rather than challenging fundamental assumptions. The economic realities of academic research thus create a powerful bias toward conventional interpretations. Revolutionary discoveries may be theoretically welcomed, but the practical incentives all point toward incremental work that builds on existing knowledge rather than radical investigations that might overturn established understanding. This institutional conservatism might be justified if our current understanding of the past were complete and well established. But the reality is that our knowledge of human history remains fragmentary and full of gaps. We've excavated only a tiny fraction of potential archaeological sites. We've explored virtually none of the underwater areas where crucial evidence might be preserved. We've barely begun to investigate the deeper, older layers where evidence of earlier civilizations might be found. Given how little we actually know, the resistance to investigating alternative possibilities seems premature at best. If we're going to construct definitive narratives about human development, shouldn't we at least make sure we're working with a representative sample of available evidence? The problem becomes even more acute when we consider the timescales involved. Human civilization as we know it spans only the last few thousand years, a tiny fraction of the time our species has existed. The assumption that nothing significant happened during the previous hundreds of thousands of years is extraordinary and should require extraordinary evidence to support it. Instead, we have the absence of evidence, which is treated as evidence of absence. The lack of clear archaeological proof for earlier civilizations is taken to mean that such civilizations never existed, rather than that their traces have been lost to time or that we haven't looked in the right places with the right methods. This logical fallacy becomes particularly problematic when we consider the processes that destroy archaeological evidence over long time periods. Erosion, sedimentation, tectonic activity, and climate change all work to erase traces of past human activity. The older the evidence, the less likely it is to survive in recognizable form. We should expect that evidence for very ancient civilizations would be rare, fragmentary, and difficult to interpret. The fact that we don't find abundant, clear proof of such civilizations doesn't mean they didn't exist. It might simply mean that the processes of time have done their work too well. Yet the absence of perfect evidence is consistently used to dismiss even the possibility that such civilizations might have existed. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how archaeological evidence works and what we should reasonably expect to find when investigating the deep past. The bias toward recent evidence also creates distortions in how we understand human capabilities. Because we have more complete records of recent achievements than ancient ones, we tend to assume that recent developments represent genuine advances rather than recoveries of previously known techniques. The sophisticated metallurgy of ancient cultures gets explained as primitive experimentation, while modern metallurgy is treated as genuine scientific advancement. The precision architecture of ancient sites is seen as lucky accidents or brute force applications, while modern precision is understood as the result of advanced engineering. The astronomical knowledge embedded in ancient monuments is dismissed as crude observation, while modern astronomy is celebrated as sophisticated science. But what if this hierarchy is backwards? What if some ancient achievements actually represent more advanced understanding than their modern equivalents? What if we're not advancing beyond ancient capabilities, but struggling to recover knowledge that was once more complete? This possibility becomes more plausible when we examine specific examples of ancient knowledge that seem to exceed what should have been possible given conventional timelines. The Antikythera mechanism's complex gear trains, the precision of ancient stone cutting, the accuracy of ancient astronomical observations, the sophistication of ancient mathematical systems. Each of these examples is typically treated as an isolated anomaly, a lucky accident, or the work of an exceptional individual. But taken together, they suggest a pattern of knowledge and capability that doesn't fit our standard narrative of gradual progress from primitive origins. The resistance to seeing this pattern isn't just academic conservatism. It's rooted in deeper psychological needs for order, progress, and meaning. We want to believe that we're the culmination of human development, that our achievements represent genuine advancement, that the future will be better than the past. If advanced civilizations have indeed risen and fallen before us, if our achievements are recoveries rather than discoveries, if history is cyclical rather than progressive, then our comfortable assumptions about human development and our own significance come under threat. This psychological resistance may be the greatest obstacle to serious investigation of these possibilities. It's not that the evidence isn't there, it's that we're emotionally invested in not seeing it. The implications are too unsettling, the challenges to our worldview too fundamental. But perhaps this discomfort itself is a signal that we're approaching something important. The most significant discoveries in human understanding have always required abandoning comfortable assumptions and confronting unsettling possibilities. The investigation of potential earlier civilizations may represent exactly such a moment in our intellectual development. The question isn't whether we can definitively prove that advanced civilizations existed before us. Given the limitations of archaeological evidence and the vast timescales involved, such proof may be impossible to achieve. The question is whether we can open ourselves to the possibility seriously enough to conduct the investigations that might reveal whatever evidence does exist. This requires not just new funding and new techniques, but new attitudes toward evidence and interpretation. It requires treating anomalies as potentially significant rather than dismissing them as irrelevant. It requires investigating underwater sites and deep archaeological layers with the same enthusiasm we bring to more conventional excavations. It requires taking seriously the knowledge preserved in oral traditions and esoteric systems rather than dismissing them as primitive mythology. Most importantly, it requires acknowledging that our current understanding of human history is incomplete and potentially incorrect in fundamental ways. The story we tell ourselves about civilization may be just that. A story constructed from limited evidence and shaped by our need for meaning and progress. The real history of human development may be far stranger, more complex, and more cyclical than we've imagined. If we're brave enough to investigate these possibilities seriously, we might discover not just new information about the past, but new perspectives on our present challenges and future potential. The evidence is fragmentary and often ambiguous, but it's accumulating. Each new discovery that doesn't quite fit established timelines. Each ancient achievement that seems too sophisticated for its supposed context. Each underwater anomaly that might represent artificial construction adds another piece to a puzzle we're only beginning to recognize. The investigation of potential earlier civilizations represents more than an academic exercise. It's a quest for understanding that could fundamentally reshape how we see ourselves and our place in the long story of human development. The knowledge we might recover could provide crucial insights into sustainable living, social organization, and the preservation of wisdom across generational boundaries. But accessing this knowledge requires courage. The courage to question established narratives, to investigate unpopular possibilities, and to accept that our understanding of human history may be far more limited than we've assumed. The time has come to overcome the institutional resistance, the psychological barriers, and the economic disincentives that have kept these investigations at the margins of serious inquiry. The stakes are too high, and the potential rewards too significant to let academic comfort zones determine what we're willing to explore. The search for our forgotten past continues, and the deepest revelations may still lie ahead, waiting in the places we haven't yet had the courage to look. The scale of this investigation becomes even more daunting when we consider the sheer immensity of what lies hidden beneath our feet and under our seas. We've mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of our own ocean floors. We've explored less than 5% of the underwater terrain, where the most crucial evidence of earlier civilizations would logically be preserved. The continental shelves that were exposed during ice ages, where coastal societies would have naturally developed, now rest under hundreds of feet of water and sediment. When marine archaeologists do venture into these submerged landscapes, they occasionally stumble upon formations that challenge easy explanation. Geometric patterns on the seafloor that seem too regular to be natural, stone arrangements that appear deliberately placed, structures that show right angles and deliberate organization in environments where such features shouldn't exist according to geological processes. The standard response to these discoveries follows a predictable pattern. Initial excitement gives way to cautious interpretation. Experts are consulted who offer alternative explanations involving unusual but natural geological processes. The formations are reclassified as interesting anomalies rather than potential archaeological sites. Funding for further investigation dries up, and the discoveries fade from active consideration. This cycle repeats with remarkable consistency across different sites and different research teams. It's as if there's an invisible threshold that underwater archaeology isn't allowed to cross, a line beyond which discoveries become too threatening to established narratives to pursue seriously. The few exceptions to this pattern are telling. When underwater sites clearly match known historical periods and civilizations, investigation proceeds normally. Ancient harbors, sunken cities from documented time periods, and shipwrecks from recorded history all receive thorough attention and careful excavation. The problem arises only when discoveries suggest much greater antiquity or challenge assumptions about ancient capabilities. Consider the curious case of underwater stone circles. Several have been discovered at depths that would place their construction during periods when sea levels were much lower than today. The age implied by their current depth suggests construction during Ice Age conditions, thousands of years before such monuments were supposed to exist. Rather than pursue the implications of these dates, researchers typically focus on proposing alternative explanations for how the structures might have ended up underwater. Perhaps they were built at sea level and later submerged by local geological processes. Perhaps they were constructed on land that subsequently sank due to tectonic activity. Perhaps the dating methods are flawed, or the depth measurements are incorrect. All of these alternative explanations are theoretically possible, but they require increasingly complex scenarios to avoid the simpler conclusion that the structures are simply older than we expect. The intellectual gymnastics required to maintain conventional timelines become more elaborate with each new discovery that doesn't fit established patterns. This resistance to straightforward interpretation becomes even more problematic when we consider the global nature of these underwater anomalies. If isolated structures in specific locations challenge conventional timelines, alternative geological explanations might be plausible. But when similar formations appear at similar depths in widely separated geographic regions, local geological processes become less convincing as explanations. The pattern suggests either a global phenomenon that affected sea levels and geological processes in ways we don't understand, or the existence of construction activities during periods when we don't expect them. Either possibility should inspire intensive investigation, yet both tend to be avoided in favor of maintaining existing interpretations. The avoidance becomes particularly striking when we examine the technological implications of some underwater discoveries. Precision-cut stones found on ocean floors, their surfaces showing tool marks that suggest advanced cutting techniques. Holes drilled through extremely hard materials with a precision that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. Joint work that maintains tight tolerances despite millennia of underwater exposure. These technological signatures appear in contexts that predate the supposed development of the techniques they represent by thousands of years. The conventional response is to question the dating, reinterpret the evidence, or simply ignore the implications, rather than explore what they might mean for our understanding of ancient human capabilities. But what if we took these discoveries at face value? What if we accepted that the evidence suggests more advanced ancient technologies than we've assumed? What would that mean for our understanding of how human knowledge develops and spreads? The implications extend far beyond archaeology into fundamental questions about the nature of technological progress. We assume that complex technologies develop gradually through accumulated innovation and refinement. Simple tools lead to more complex ones. Basic techniques evolve into sophisticated methods. Knowledge builds systematically over time. Yet the archaeological evidence often shows the opposite pattern. Complex technologies appear suddenly in the record, apparently fully developed. Sophisticated techniques are applied from their first appearance, with a level of skill that suggests long experience and refinement. Knowledge systems emerge that seem to have no visible foundation in prior development. This pattern appears repeatedly across different time periods and different technologies. The bronze working techniques that launched the Bronze Age didn't gradually evolve from copper working. They appeared as complete technological systems that included complex alloys, sophisticated casting methods, and advanced metallurgical understanding. The astronomical knowledge that enabled accurate calendar systems didn't slowly accumulate from basic observation. It emerged as complete mathematical frameworks, capable of predicting celestial events with remarkable precision. The sudden appearance of complex technologies suggests either that their development happened much earlier than we think, in contexts that haven't been preserved in the archaeological record, or that knowledge was being transmitted through channels we don't recognize or understand. If development happened earlier, then we're missing entire chapters of technological history. The gradual refinement and experimentation that should precede major technological breakthroughs occurred in periods or places that have left no trace in our current understanding of the past. This possibility points back to the question of lost civilizations and the cyclical nature of human development. If knowledge was transmitted through unrecognized channels, then we need to reconsider how information moves through human societies across time and space. Perhaps oral traditions, symbolic systems, and ritualized practices preserve technical knowledge more effectively than we've assumed. Perhaps the mystery schools and esoteric traditions that claim to guard ancient wisdom were actually maintaining technological information that survived from earlier periods. Either possibility challenges our linear model of technological progress and suggests that human capabilities may have been more advanced in the past than we currently recognize. This has profound implications for how we understand our present situation and future potential. If we're recovering knowledge rather than discovering it for the first time, then our technological development may be following patterns established long ago rather than breaking genuinely new ground. Our greatest innovations might be rediscoveries of principles that were understood and applied by earlier civilizations in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. This perspective transforms how we think about sustainability and long-term planning. Instead of assuming that continuous growth and technological advancement are natural and inevitable, we might need to consider that civilizations go through cycles of development and decline, with knowledge being preserved and transmitted across the gaps between them. Understanding these cycles could provide crucial insights into how to maintain stability and preserve knowledge through periods of social and environmental change. If earlier civilizations developed sustainable technologies and social systems that enabled them to thrive for extended periods, studying their achievements could inform our own efforts to create lasting solutions to contemporary challenges. But accessing this knowledge requires us to take seriously the possibility that such civilizations existed and that traces of their achievements might still be recoverable through careful investigation. This means overcoming not just technical challenges in archaeological research, but intellectual and institutional resistance to exploring possibilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about human development. The resistance runs deep because it touches on core beliefs about progress, uniqueness, and human potential. We want to believe that we're advancing beyond all previous achievements, that our civilization represents the pinnacle of human development, that our future is bright with unlimited possibilities for growth and improvement. If advanced civilizations have indeed risen and fallen before us, if our achievements represent recovery rather than genuine innovation, if history is cyclical rather than progressive, then these comfortable beliefs come under serious challenge. The implications are unsettling enough that most researchers prefer to avoid investigating them seriously. Yet the evidence continues to accumulate. Each new underwater discovery that doesn't fit conventional timelines, each ancient technology that seems too sophisticated for its supposed period, each knowledge system that appears to come from nowhere, adds weight to the possibility that our understanding of human history is fundamentally incomplete. The question is whether we can overcome our psychological investment in current narratives long enough to investigate these possibilities objectively. Can we set aside our need for progress and uniqueness long enough to explore what the evidence might actually be telling us about our past? The investigation requires not just new funding and new techniques, but new ways of thinking about evidence and interpretation. It requires treating anomalies as potentially significant rather than dismissing them as irrelevant. It requires exploring underwater sites and deep archaeological layers with the same enthusiasm we bring to more conventional excavations. It requires taking seriously the knowledge preserved in oral traditions and esoteric systems rather than dismissing them as primitive superstition. Most importantly, it requires acknowledging that our current understanding of human history may be wrong in fundamental ways. The story we tell ourselves about civilization may be a construction based on limited evidence and shaped by our psychological needs rather than objective investigation of all available information. The real history of human development may be far more complex, more cyclical, and more mysterious than we've imagined. If we're courageous enough to investigate these possibilities seriously, we might discover not just new information about the past, but new perspectives on our present situation and future challenges. The search for evidence of earlier civilizations isn't just an academic exercise. It's a quest for understanding that could reshape our entire conception of human potential and our place in the long story of development and change. The knowledge we might recover could provide crucial insights into sustainable living, social organization, and the preservation of wisdom across generational and cultural boundaries. But the investigation also carries risks. If we discover that advanced civilizations have indeed risen and fallen before us, we'll have to confront uncomfortable questions about our own stability and future prospects. If history is cyclical rather than progressive, if collapse is possible even for technologically advanced societies, then our confidence in continuous improvement and unlimited growth becomes much harder to maintain. Perhaps this recognition is exactly what we need. Perhaps understanding the full pattern of human development, including its cycles of rise and decline, is essential for navigating the challenges that lie ahead. Perhaps the wisdom preserved from earlier civilizations could help us avoid the mistakes that led to their downfall. The evidence is fragmentary and often ambiguous, but it's there, waiting in the deep places we haven't yet explored, in the underwater sites we haven't yet investigated, in the anomalies we haven't yet taken seriously. The question isn't whether we can prove definitively that advanced civilizations existed before us. The question is whether we have the intellectual courage to look for them seriously and the wisdom to learn from what we find. The investigation continues, and the most important discoveries may still lie ahead, hidden in the depths of time and sea, waiting for minds brave enough to seek them out, and honest enough to accept what they might reveal about the true nature of human civilization and our place within its vast, mysterious cycles. The strangest aspect of this investigation may be how it intersects with phenomena we encounter in our everyday lives, manifestations that we've learned to dismiss or explain away rather than examine closely. Walk through any major city and you'll notice something peculiar about our oldest buildings. Structures that seem to follow architectural principles we claim to have forgotten and then rediscovered. The precision of ancient stonework that appears in cathedrals supposedly built by medieval craftsmen with primitive tools. The mathematical relationships embedded in structures that predate our formal understanding of the principles they embody. These aren't isolated curiosities confined to remote archaeological sites. They're woven into the fabric of our modern environment, hiding in plain sight because we've been taught not to see them as evidence of anything significant. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe, for instance, demonstrate engineering principles that weren't supposed to be understood until centuries after their construction. The acoustic properties of these spaces achieve effects that modern architects struggle to replicate, even with computer modeling and advanced materials. The builders of these structures left behind guild traditions that claim their knowledge came from much earlier sources, from master builders who had preserved techniques through dark ages when such understanding was nearly lost. Yet we treat these claims as medieval mythology rather than potential historical documentation of knowledge preservation systems. Similar patterns appear in the traditional crafts that survived into the industrial age. Blacksmiths, working with techniques passed down through generations, could achieve metallurgical results that baffled university-trained engineers. Stonemasons, using methods their grandfathers had taught them, could cut and fit stone with tolerances that rivaled machine precision. Shipbuilders following ancient designs created vessels that outperformed ships designed using modern theoretical principles. When these traditional techniques were finally studied scientifically, researchers often found that they incorporated principles that hadn't been formally discovered until decades or centuries later. The practitioners themselves frequently couldn't explain why their methods worked, only that they had always worked when applied correctly. The knowledge existed in practical form long before it was understood theoretically. This suggests that technological understanding can be preserved and transmitted in ways that bypass formal educational institutions and written documentation. Skills and knowledge can survive through practical application and hands-on teaching, even when the theoretical framework that originally developed them has been lost or forgotten. If this kind of knowledge preservation is possible over periods of centuries, it raises intriguing questions about what might be preserved over longer time spans. Could sophisticated understanding survive through millennia of cultural disruption and social collapse? Could practical knowledge be maintained by small groups of specialists even when the broader civilization that created it has disappeared? The existence of such preservation mechanisms would help explain some of the archaeological anomalies we've discussed. The sudden appearance of complex technologies might represent not innovation, but the application of knowledge that had been maintained through dark ages by groups dedicated to preserving it. The sophisticated astronomical understanding embedded in ancient monuments might reflect calculations performed by specialists working within traditions that stretched back thousands of years. Evidence for such traditions appears in various forms throughout history. The Egyptian temple schools claim to preserve knowledge from the time of the gods, maintaining records and techniques that predated the historical pharaohs. The Mesopotamian priesthoods spoke of wisdom received from divine teachers who had appeared after great catastrophes to restore civilization. Similar claims appear in the traditions of ancient India, China, and Mesoamerica. Modern scholars typically dismiss these accounts as mythological explanations for natural cultural development. But what if they contain historical truth disguised in religious language? What if these institutions really were the remnants of earlier educational systems that had survived civilizational collapse? The possibility becomes more intriguing when we examine what these groups actually knew. Despite being dismissed as primitive by later civilizations, they often demonstrated understanding that exceeded what was publicly known in their time. The astronomical observations of ancient priest astronomers were more accurate than those of medieval university scholars. The medical knowledge preserved in traditional healing systems often achieved better results than academic medicine until quite recently. These knowledge traditions didn't just preserve information, they continued to develop it. The mathematics of ancient India advanced far beyond what was known in contemporary Greece or Rome. The metallurgy of traditional African cultures produced steel alloys that weren't matched in Europe for centuries. The agricultural techniques of pre-Columbian America sustained larger populations than European methods could support. Yet because these achievements didn't fit established narratives about technological progress, they were typically ignored or explained away rather than studied seriously. The assumption that knowledge flows in a single direction, from primitive to sophisticated, from ancient to modern, prevented recognition of cases where the reverse might be true. This bias becomes particularly problematic when we consider how much traditional knowledge has been lost in recent centuries. The Industrial Revolution didn't just introduce new technologies, it actively displaced older ones. Traditional crafts were abandoned in favor of mass production. Local knowledge systems were replaced by standardized educational curricula. Oral traditions gave way to written documentation that often failed to capture the full depth of what was being preserved. The result has been a massive loss of knowledge that took thousands of years to accumulate and refine. Techniques that had been perfected through generations of practice disappeared within decades. Understanding that had been maintained through careful teaching relationships vanished when the teachers died without finding suitable students. Entire fields of practical knowledge simply ceased to exist. We're only beginning to realize the extent of what has been lost. Modern researchers studying traditional techniques often find that they incorporated principles we're just now beginning to understand scientifically. The loss of this knowledge represents not just cultural tragedy, but the disappearance of solutions to problems we're still struggling to solve. If such extensive knowledge loss can occur within historical memory, how much more might have been lost over longer time periods? If entire technological traditions can disappear within a few generations of social change, what might have vanished during periods of major civilizational collapse? The implications extend beyond individual techniques to entire approaches to understanding the world. Traditional knowledge systems often integrated practical skills with philosophical frameworks in ways that modern specialization has made difficult to maintain. The master craftsman wasn't just skilled in technique, but understood the principles underlying his work in ways that connected his craft to broader patterns of meaning and purpose. This integration of practical and theoretical knowledge created remarkably stable systems of understanding that could persist through social upheavals that would destroy more fragmented approaches. When knowledge is embedded in coherent worldviews rather than isolated in specialized disciplines, it becomes more resistant to partial loss and easier to reconstruct from surviving fragments. The survival of such integrated knowledge systems might explain some of the puzzling continuities we find in ancient cultures. The persistence of sophisticated astronomical observations across different civilizations. The appearance of similar mathematical principles in widely separated societies. The consistency of certain symbolic systems across vast geographic and temporal distances, rather than representing independent invention or cultural diffusion through normal historical processes. These patterns might reflect the preservation and transmission of knowledge from earlier periods when understanding was more complete and more widely shared. The investigation of this possibility requires new approaches to studying traditional knowledge systems. Instead of dismissing oral traditions as unreliable mythology, we need to examine them for technical information that might have been preserved in symbolic form. Instead of assuming that ancient techniques were primitive attempts at modern methods, we need to study them on their own terms to understand what they were actually designed to accomplish. Most importantly, we need to recognize that knowledge loss is not just a historical process, but an ongoing reality. Traditional techniques and understanding are still disappearing at an accelerating rate as global culture becomes increasingly homogenized. If we want to understand what earlier civilizations might have known, we need to study what traditional cultures still preserve before it vanishes completely. The urgency of this investigation goes beyond academic curiosity. If traditional knowledge systems do preserve understanding from earlier periods, they might contain solutions to problems we're struggling with today. Sustainable agriculture techniques that could feed large populations without depleting soil or water resources. Construction methods that create durable structures without massive energy inputs. Social organization principles that maintain stability across long time periods. These aren't just theoretical possibilities. Traditional societies around the world have developed approaches to these challenges that often outperform modern alternatives. The terraced agriculture of ancient Peru supported larger populations than contemporary industrial farming in the same regions. The architectural techniques of traditional builders created structures that have lasted for centuries without maintenance, while modern buildings require constant repair and eventual replacement. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming the same institutional resistance that affects archaeological investigation of earlier civilizations. Academic disciplines are organized around the assumption that newer knowledge is generally superior to older knowledge. Funding priorities favor research into cutting-edge technologies rather than investigation of traditional techniques. Career advancement depends on contributing to established fields rather than exploring alternatives that might challenge current approaches. The result is a systematic bias against taking traditional knowledge seriously, even when it demonstrably achieves better results than modern methods. This bias not only prevents us from learning from existing traditional systems, but also makes it less likely that we'll recognize evidence of even more ancient knowledge preservation if we encounter it. Yet the evidence continues to accumulate in forms that become harder to ignore. Each traditional technique that proves superior to modern alternatives raises questions about what other knowledge might have been lost. Each discovery of sophisticated understanding in supposedly primitive cultures challenges assumptions about the direction of technological development. Each example of knowledge preservation through oral tradition demonstrates that complex information can survive much longer than written documentation. The pattern suggests that our understanding of how knowledge develops and spreads may be fundamentally flawed. Instead of a linear progression from simple to complex, from primitive to sophisticated, we might be looking at cyclical processes where knowledge accumulates, gets partially lost, and then slowly recovers through different pathways. If this cyclical model is correct, then our current technological civilization might not represent the pinnacle of human achievement, but rather one phase in a much longer process of development and rediscovery. Our greatest innovations might be recoveries of principles that were understood and applied more effectively in earlier periods. This possibility transforms how we think about progress and development. Instead of assuming that newer is automatically better, we might need to examine older approaches more carefully to understand what we might have lost in the process of change. Instead of dismissing traditional knowledge as outdated superstition, we might need to study it as potentially superior solutions to problems we're still struggling to solve. The investigation requires not just new research methods, but new attitudes toward evidence and interpretation. It means taking seriously the claims of traditional knowledge holders, even when they conflict with academic theories. It means studying ancient techniques with the assumption that they might incorporate principles we haven't yet understood, rather than dismissing them as primitive attempts at modern methods. Most importantly, it means recognizing that knowledge loss is a real and ongoing process that affects not just individual techniques, but entire ways of understanding the world. If we want to recover what might have been lost from earlier periods, we need to first stop the loss that's occurring in our own time. The search for evidence of earlier civilizations thus becomes inseparable from the urgent task of preserving the knowledge that still exists in traditional cultures around the world. Both investigations face the same institutional resistance, the same academic biases, and the same economic pressures that favor conventional approaches over alternative possibilities. But both also offer the same potential rewards: a deeper understanding of human capabilities, better solutions to contemporary problems, and a more complete picture of what our species has achieved over its long history on this planet. The knowledge we might recover could reshape not just our understanding of the past, but our approach to the challenges that define our future. The investigation continues in laboratories studying traditional materials, in field sites where ancient techniques are being rediscovered, in libraries where oral traditions are being documented before they disappear forever. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that grows more complex and more fascinating with every new revelation. The questions multiply faster than the answers, but that itself may be the most important discovery of all. If human knowledge is more complex, more cyclical, and more mysterious than we've assumed, then the investigation of our past becomes not just an academic exercise, but an essential component of understanding who we are and what we might become. The evidence is all around us, embedded in the structures we inhabit, preserved in the traditions we're losing, waiting in the depths we haven't explored. The question isn't whether we can prove definitively that earlier civilizations possessed knowledge we've lost and are struggling to recover. The question is whether we can overcome our assumptions about progress and development long enough to investigate these possibilities with the seriousness they deserve. The search for our forgotten past may ultimately be a search for our forgotten potential, a quest to understand not just where we came from, but where we might be capable of going if we can learn from the full breadth of human experience across all the cycles of development and loss that have shaped our species' long journey through time. The resistance we encounter in pursuing these investigations reveals something profound about how knowledge institutions actually function in our society. They're not neutral repositories of information, waiting passively for new discoveries to add to their collections. They're active filters, shaped by assumptions so fundamental that they've become invisible to the people working within them. Consider how funding decisions get made in archaeological research. Grant applications that propose to investigate known civilizations within accepted timeframes sail through review processes. Projects that promise to illuminate the already familiar receive generous support. But applications that suggest looking for evidence outside established parameters face an uphill battle that has little to do with scientific merit and everything to do with institutional comfort zones. The review committees that evaluate these proposals aren't conspiring to suppress revolutionary discoveries. They're simply applying standards that have been shaped by decades of academic culture. Standards that inherently favor incremental additions to existing knowledge over fundamental challenges to established narratives. The system selects for conformity without anyone consciously choosing conformity as a goal. This filtering process becomes particularly problematic when we consider the geographic bias in archaeological investigation. The vast majority of research funding and attention goes to sites in politically stable regions with established academic infrastructure. We study extensively what's easily accessible, and ignore what's difficult to reach, regardless of its potential significance. The result is a profoundly skewed sample of human history. We know enormous amounts about civilizations that happened to develop in areas that are now wealthy and politically stable. We know almost nothing about what might have occurred in regions that are now underwater, politically unstable, or economically marginalized. Yet these are precisely the areas where evidence of earlier civilizations would be most likely to survive and most likely to remain undiscovered. The continental shelves that were exposed during ice ages represent millions of square kilometers of territory where coastal civilizations could have developed. These areas would have had the abundant resources, moderate climates, and access to water transportation that encouraged the development of complex societies. They're also precisely the areas that are now completely inaccessible to conventional archaeological investigation. When marine archaeologists do work in these regions, they face technical challenges that make their investigations enormously expensive and logistically complex. Deep water excavation requires specialized equipment, trained personnel, and months of preparation for what might yield only fragmentary results. The cost-benefit analysis rarely favors such expeditions when safer, cheaper projects on land promise more predictable outcomes. Yet this economic logic creates a systematic blind spot in our understanding of human history. We're essentially ignoring the places where evidence of earlier civilizations would most likely be found, not because we've investigated them and found nothing, but because investigation is difficult and expensive. The same economic pressures affect how we interpret the evidence we do find. When underwater formations are discovered that might represent artificial structures, the immediate question isn't what they might tell us about ancient human capabilities. The question is whether further investigation can be justified financially. If the formations are ambiguous, if their age is uncertain, if their artificial nature can't be definitively proven, then funding for detailed study typically disappears. This creates a catch-22 situation where evidence needs to be unambiguous to justify investigation, but investigation is necessary to determine whether evidence is unambiguous. The result is that potentially significant discoveries get abandoned at exactly the point where they become most interesting scientifically. The pattern repeats across different types of evidence and different research contexts. Genetic studies that reveal unexpected patterns in human DNA face similar challenges when their implications don't fit established theories about population movements and cultural development. Dating techniques that yield results outside accepted chronologies get questioned more rigorously than those that confirm expected timelines. Technological achievements that seem too sophisticated for their supposed period get explained away rather than investigated as potential indicators of more advanced ancient capabilities. This institutional resistance operates not through deliberate suppression, but through the subtler mechanisms of academic culture. Graduate students learn quickly that challenging fundamental assumptions is a risky career strategy. Researchers discover that unconventional interpretations face much higher standards of proof than conventional ones. Journals show reluctance to publish results that might require major revisions to establish chronologies. The cumulative effect is a research environment that strongly favors incremental modifications to existing knowledge over revolutionary discoveries that might overturn basic assumptions. This wouldn't be problematic if our current understanding of human history were complete and well established. But the reality is that our knowledge remains fragmentary, geographically biased, and temporally limited. We've investigated less than 1% of potential archaeological sites worldwide. We've barely scratched the surface of underwater archaeology. We've focused almost exclusively on the most recent periods of human development, while largely ignoring the vast stretches of time when our species was supposedly accomplishing nothing of significance. Given these limitations, the resistance to investigating alternative possibilities seems not just premature, but counterproductive. If we're going to construct definitive narratives about human development, shouldn't we at least attempt to work with a more representative sample of available evidence? The problem becomes even more acute when we consider the rate at which potential evidence is being destroyed by modern development. Construction projects, mining operations, and agricultural expansion are constantly disturbing archaeological sites before they can be properly investigated. Climate change and rising sea levels are accelerating erosion processes that destroy evidence faster than it can be studied. We're in a race against time to document and understand what remains of our deep past before it disappears entirely. Yet our research priorities remain focused on the familiar and easily accessible, rather than the urgent and potentially revolutionary. The disconnect between the magnitude of what we might be losing and the scope of what we're actually investigating is staggering. Meanwhile, the few researchers who do attempt to investigate unconventional possibilities face not just funding challenges, but professional isolation. The academic job market rewards specialization within established fields, not boundary-crossing investigations that might challenge fundamental assumptions. Career advancement depends on publishing in respected journals, which show strong preferences for work that builds incrementally on accepted theories. The result is a brain drain away from the most important questions toward the most professionally safe ones. The brightest minds in archaeology and related fields are channeled into narrow specializations, rather than broad investigations that might yield paradigm-shifting discoveries. We've created a system that systematically discourages exactly the kind of research that could most dramatically advance our understanding. This institutional structure wouldn't be sustainable if it weren't reinforced by deeper psychological and cultural factors. The resistance to investigating earlier civilizations isn't just professional, it's existential. The possibility that advanced societies might have risen and fallen before us challenges core beliefs about progress, uniqueness, and human destiny that extend far beyond academic archaeology. Modern civilization is built on assumptions of continuous advancement, of linear progress from primitive origins toward ever greater sophistication. These assumptions justify not just our research priorities, but our economic systems, our political structures, and our sense of meaning and purpose. If history is cyclical rather than progressive, if our achievements represent recovery rather than genuine innovation, if we're not the culmination of human development, but just another iteration in a long series of rises and falls, then the foundations of modern culture come under serious challenge. The stakes of this investigation extend far beyond academic questions about the past. They touch on fundamental issues about how we understand ourselves, how we organize our societies, and how we prepare for an uncertain future. If advanced civilizations have indeed collapsed before us, their experiences could provide crucial insights into the challenges we face today. Understanding how earlier societies dealt with resource depletion, climate change, social inequality, and technological disruption could inform our own responses to these persistent human challenges. Learning from their mistakes could help us avoid similar fates. Recovering their successes could provide alternative approaches to problems we're struggling to solve. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming not just technical and financial obstacles, but the psychological resistance that keeps us from taking these possibilities seriously. We need to develop the intellectual courage to investigate questions whose answers might be uncomfortable, and the emotional maturity to handle discoveries that challenge our sense of uniqueness and progress. The investigation also requires new forms of collaboration that cross traditional disciplinary boundaries. Understanding potential earlier civilizations demands expertise in archaeology, geology, oceanography, genetics, linguistics, and numerous other fields. Yet academic institutions are organized around specialized departments that rarely communicate effectively with each other. The most important discoveries may come not from within established disciplines, but from the spaces between them, where different forms of evidence and analysis can be combined in novel ways. This requires researchers who are willing to work outside their comfort zones and institutions that are flexible enough to support interdisciplinary investigation. The technological tools needed for this research are becoming increasingly available. Satellite imagery can reveal patterns in landscapes that weren't visible from ground level. Ground-penetrating radar can detect buried structures without destructive excavation. Genetic analysis can trace population movements and relationships across vast time periods. Deep-sea exploration technologies can access underwater sites that were previously impossible to investigate. What we lack isn't the technical capability to pursue these investigations, but the institutional will to undertake them seriously. The tools exist, the questions are clear, and the potential rewards are enormous. What's missing is the courage to use our capabilities in service of discoveries that might challenge everything we think we know about human history. The evidence continues to accumulate in forms that become increasingly difficult to ignore. Each new discovery that doesn't fit established timelines adds weight to the possibility that our understanding of the past is incomplete. Each ancient achievement that seems too sophisticated for its supposed context raises questions about what else we might have missed. Each traditional knowledge system that preserves information we thought was lost suggests that human capabilities may be far more extensive than we've assumed. The pattern points toward a conclusion that many researchers are reluctant to embrace, that human civilization may be much older, much more complex, and much more cyclical than we've been willing to consider. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond academic archaeology into fundamental questions about who we are, where we came from, and where we might be going. The investigation of these possibilities represents more than a search for lost civilizations. It's a quest for a more complete understanding of human potential, human vulnerability, and human resilience. The knowledge we might recover could reshape not just our understanding of the past, but our approach to the challenges that define our present and future. The questions are too important to be left to the slow, cautious processes of conventional academic research. The stakes are too high for institutional comfort zones and career considerations to determine what we're willing to investigate. The time has come to pursue these possibilities with the urgency and resources they deserve. The search for our forgotten past continues in underwater sites around the world, in genetic laboratories studying human origins, in archives preserving traditional knowledge before it disappears forever. Each new piece of evidence adds complexity to a puzzle that grows more fascinating and more challenging with every discovery. We may never be able to prove definitively that advanced civilizations existed before us. The evidence is too fragmentary, the timescales too vast, the processes of destruction too thorough. But we can investigate the possibility seriously enough to recover whatever traces might remain, and to learn whatever lessons they might teach. The journey into our deep past is also a journey into our possible futures. Understanding the full scope of human achievement and failure across all the cycles of development and collapse that have shaped our species could provide the wisdom we need to navigate the challenges ahead. The investigation continues, and the most important revelations may still await us in the places we haven't yet had the courage to explore, in the questions we haven't yet been willing to ask, in the possibilities we haven't yet been brave enough to consider. The patterns we've uncovered lead us to an even more unsettling realization, one that historians have spent centuries trying to avoid confronting. It's not just that evidence for earlier civilizations exists and gets systematically ignored. It's that the very methods we use to study the past are designed, perhaps unconsciously, to prevent us from finding what we're not supposed to see. Think about how we date archaeological sites. Carbon dating, our most trusted method, only works on organic materials that are less than 50,000 years old. Anything older than that falls into what researchers politely call the dating gap, a convenient blind spot that covers most of the time period when earlier civilizations could have existed. For sites that might be hundreds of thousands of years old, we rely on stratigraphic dating, essentially guessing age based on which layer of Earth something was buried in. But stratigraphic dating assumes that older materials are always buried deeper than newer ones, an assumption that breaks down completely in regions affected by geological upheaval, flooding, or volcanic activity. The very events that would have destroyed earlier civilizations are the same ones that would scramble the geological layers we use to date their remains. It's almost as if the Earth itself has conspired to hide the evidence, but more likely, we've simply chosen dating methods that work well for recent history and poorly for the deep past. The result is a systematic bias toward finding recent evidence and missing ancient evidence, regardless of what actually existed. Consider how this plays out in practice. When archaeologists find stone tools or pottery fragments, they can usually date them with reasonable accuracy. But when they find precisely cut stone blocks or evidence of advanced metallurgy, the dating becomes much more problematic. The techniques that created these artifacts don't leave organic residues suitable for carbon dating. The geological contexts are often too disturbed for stratigraphic analysis. The result is that the most sophisticated ancient artifacts are often the ones we can date least accurately. They get assigned ages based on assumptions about when such techniques should have been developed, rather than on direct physical evidence. The circular reasoning is almost perfect. We assume certain capabilities didn't exist in early periods, so when we find evidence of those capabilities, we date it to later periods when we think it should have existed. This methodological bias affects every aspect of archaeological interpretation. Sites that show evidence of advanced planning and construction get dated to periods when we expect such sophistication. Artifacts that demonstrate complex manufacturing techniques get assigned to eras when we believe those techniques were available. Evidence that doesn't fit our evolutionary timeline gets reinterpreted, redated, or simply set aside as anomalous. The few researchers who challenge these dating assignments face an uphill battle against institutional inertia. Proposing that a site might be much older than previously thought requires not just presenting new evidence, but overturning years of established interpretation. The professional risks are enormous, the funding challenges severe, and the likelihood of acceptance minimal. Yet occasionally, breakthroughs occur that reveal just how wrong our dating assumptions can be. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was initially dismissed as a medieval site because its sophisticated stone carvings were thought to be far too advanced for the Neolithic period. Only when organic materials from the site were directly carbon dated did researchers discover that it was actually 11,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by 6 millennia and challenging every assumption about when complex religious architecture was supposed to have emerged. The discovery forced a complete revision of timelines for the development of civilization in that region, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about how many other sites might be much older than we think, misinterpreted because their sophistication doesn't fit our expectations for their supposed time periods. The resistance to such revisions runs deeper than simple academic conservatism. Our entire understanding of human progress is built on the assumption that complexity develops gradually over time. If sophisticated achievements can appear much earlier than expected, if technological capabilities can emerge suddenly rather than through slow evolution, then our models of cultural development require fundamental reconsideration. This is where the psychological barriers become most apparent. We need to believe that our current civilization represents the culmination of steady progress from primitive origins. The alternative, that human capabilities might be cyclical, that sophisticated achievements might be normal rather than exceptional, that we might be recovering rather than discovering, threatens core assumptions about meaning and progress that extend far beyond archaeology. The resistance manifests in subtle but pervasive ways throughout the academic establishment. Graduate programs train students to work within existing paradigm review processes favor incremental advances rather than question fundamental assumptions. Peer over revolutionary discoveries. Funding agencies support safe projects that promise predictable results rather than risky investigations is a research environment that systematically discourages exactly that might yield paradigm-shifting findings. The result, the kind of work that could most dramatically advance our understanding of human history. The brightest minds are channeled into narrow specializations. The most innovative thinking is marginalized as unprofessional speculation, and the most important questions are avoided as too dangerous to pursue seriously. Meanwhile, the evidence continues to accumulate in forms that become increasingly difficult to explain away. Precision-cut stone blocks that show tool marks from instruments that supposedly didn't exist when they were carved. Metal artifacts that demonstrate alloy compositions that weren't supposed to be understood until thousands of years later. Astronomical alignments that require mathematical knowledge that wasn't supposed to have been developed until much more recent periods. Each discovery gets individually explained through increasingly complex scenarios designed to avoid challenging fundamental assumptions about technological development. The cumulative weight of these explanations, their growing complexity and decreasing plausibility, should trigger scientific skepticism about the underlying assumptions they're designed to protect. Instead, the alternative explanations are simply accepted as necessary to maintain established timelines. The pattern reveals something disturbing about how scientific institutions actually function when their foundational assumptions are challenged. Rather than following evidence wherever it leads, they work to protect existing paradigms by explaining away contradictory evidence. The process isn't consciously dishonest, but it produces results that are functionally indistinguishable from deliberate suppression. This institutional behavior becomes particularly problematic when we consider the global nature of archaeological anomalies. Similar unexplained achievements appear across continents and cultures that had no known contact with each other. The precision stone cutting, the advanced metallurgy, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge, these aren't isolated curiosities confined to single locations. They represent worldwide phenomena that suggest either remarkable coincidences or underlying patterns we don't understand. The conventional explanation involves independent invention, the idea that humans naturally develop similar solutions to similar problems. But this explanation becomes strained when the similarities extend beyond general approaches to specific techniques, measurements, and even symbolic systems. The level of correspondence between geographically separated achievements suggests either much greater ancient connectivity than we recognize, or preservation of knowledge from earlier periods when such connectivity existed. Either possibility challenges established narratives about ancient isolation and gradual development. Both suggest that our understanding of how knowledge spreads and persists across time and space may be fundamentally flawed. Yet neither possibility receives serious investigation, because both would require admitting that our current models of cultural development are incomplete or incorrect. The resistance to these investigations extends beyond academic institutions into the broader cultural and economic systems that depend on assumptions of continuous progress. Modern capitalism is built on the premise that growth and innovation are natural and inevitable. Political systems justify their authority through promises of improved future conditions. Educational institutions organize their curricula around the assumption that newer knowledge is generally superior to older knowledge. If history is cyclical rather than progressive, if our achievements represent recovery rather than genuine advancement, if earlier civilizations possessed knowledge and capabilities we've lost rather than knowledge we've surpassed, then these foundational assumptions become problematic. The implications extend far beyond archaeology into fundamental questions about how we organize society and understand our place in the world. The stakes of this investigation have never been higher. We live in an age of accelerating environmental change, resource depletion, and social instability. Understanding how earlier civilizations dealt with similar challenges could provide crucial insights into sustainable development, social organization, and long-term planning. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming the institutional and psychological barriers that keep us from investigating these possibilities seriously. The tools and techniques needed for this research continue to improve. Satellite imagery reveals patterns in landscapes that weren't visible from ground level. Genetic analysis traces population movements and relationships across vast time periods. Deep-sea exploration technologies access underwater sites that were previously impossible to investigate. Ground-penetrating radar detects buried structures without destructive excavation. What we lack isn't technical capability, but institutional courage. The means exist to pursue these investigations systematically and rigorously. What's missing is the will to undertake research whose results might challenge everything we think we know about human history and development. The evidence accumulates in forms that become increasingly difficult to dismiss. Traditional knowledge systems preserve information that academic institutions thought was lost. Underwater formations show geometric patterns that challenge natural explanations. Ancient artifacts demonstrate capabilities that don't fit established timelines. Genetic studies reveal population patterns that don't match conventional models of human migration and development. Each discovery adds complexity to a picture that grows more intriguing and more challenging with every new piece of evidence. The pattern suggests not just isolated anomalies, but systematic gaps in our understanding of human capabilities and historical development. The investigation of these possibilities represents more than academic curiosity. It's a search for wisdom that could inform our response to contemporary challenges. If advanced civilizations did exist before us, if they developed sustainable technologies and social systems, if they learned to live within planetary boundaries rather than constantly expanding beyond them, then understanding their achievements could provide alternatives to the unsustainable trajectories that characterize modern development. But accessing this knowledge requires fundamental changes in how we approach the past. Instead of looking for evidence that confirms existing narratives, we need to investigate possibilities that challenge our assumptions. Instead of explaining away anomalies, we need to treat them as potentially significant indicators of patterns we don't yet understand. Most importantly, we need to develop the intellectual humility to admit that our current understanding of human history may be incomplete, biased, or fundamentally incorrect. The story we tell ourselves about civilization may be a construction based on limited evidence and shaped by psychological needs, rather than comprehensive investigation of all available information. The search for evidence of earlier civilizations isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the full scope of human potential and the complete pattern of human development across all the cycles of achievement and loss that have shaped our species. The knowledge we might recover could provide insights not just into where we came from, but into where we might be capable of going. The questions multiply faster than the answers, but perhaps that's the most important discovery of all. If human history is more complex, more mysterious, and more cyclical than we've assumed, then the investigation of our past becomes essential for understanding our present situation and future possibilities. The resistance will continue, the institutional barriers will remain formidable, and the psychological challenges will persist. But the evidence continues to accumulate, the questions become more pressing, and the potential rewards grow more significant with each passing year. The time has come to pursue these investigations with the urgency and resources they deserve, to overcome the barriers that have kept these questions at the margins of serious inquiry, and to develop the courage to follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how uncomfortable the destination might be. The search for our forgotten past continues in laboratories and libraries, in underwater sites and genetic databases, in the preserved knowledge of traditional cultures, and the emerging capabilities of new technologies. Each investigation adds another piece to a puzzle that may ultimately reshape our understanding of who we are and what we might become. The journey into the deep past is also a journey into possible futures, a quest for wisdom that could guide us through the challenges ahead. The civilization we're building today may not be the first to face these dilemmas, and understanding how earlier societies navigated similar crossroads could provide the insights we need to choose our path wisely. The investigation continues, and the most important discoveries may still lie ahead, waiting in the depths we haven't explored, the questions we haven't asked, the possibilities we haven't yet found the courage to consider seriously. The truth about our past may be stranger and more complex than we've imagined, but it may also be exactly what we need to understand our present and shape our future. The most troubling aspect of this investigation may be how it forces us to confront the deliberate destruction of evidence that continues even today. We're not just dealing with the natural processes of time that erode away traces of the past. We're witnessing active suppression of discoveries that challenge the established narrative, a pattern that extends from private collections to government archives to academic institutions that should know better. Consider what happens when construction projects uncover unexpected archaeological remains. In most cases, the discovery triggers a brief investigation, a few photographs are taken, and then development continues as planned. The remains are catalogued, boxed, and sent to storage facilities where they join millions of other artifacts that will never be studied, never be displayed, never contribute to our understanding of the past. This isn't malicious suppression. It's simply economic pragmatism. Construction schedules don't accommodate extended archaeological investigations. Development budgets don't include funding for comprehensive site analysis. Legal frameworks prioritize property rights over historical preservation. The result is a systematic destruction of evidence that happens so routinely we barely notice it anymore. But occasionally, construction workers uncover something so anomalous, so clearly inconsistent with established timelines, that it can't be easily categorized and forgotten. These are the discoveries that create problems for everyone involved. The developers want to continue construction. The archaeologists don't know how to interpret what they've found. The academic institutions don't want to deal with evidence that might require rewriting textbooks. The solution, more often than not, is to make the problem disappear. The site gets reclassified as contaminated or geologically unstable. The artifacts get lost in bureaucratic transfers between institutions. The documentation gets misfiled or accidentally destroyed. The few researchers who tried to study the discovery find their access restricted, their funding cut, their career prospects dimmed by association with controversial findings. This pattern repeats with remarkable consistency across different countries, different time periods, and different types of discoveries. It's as if there's an invisible immune system operating within our cultural institutions, automatically rejecting evidence that threatens to disrupt established narratives about human development. The process isn't coordinated by some shadowy conspiracy. It doesn't require secret meetings or explicit instructions. It operates through the ordinary mechanisms of institutional self-preservation, career protection, and bureaucratic inertia. Everyone involved has perfectly reasonable justifications for their individual decisions. The cumulative effect, however, is the systematic suppression of potentially revolutionary evidence. This institutional behavior becomes even more troubling when we examine specific cases where extraordinary discoveries simply vanished from public attention. The oversized skeletal remains that were regularly reported in 19th century American newspapers, the precision-cut stone blocks uncovered during construction projects in major cities, the metal artifacts found in geological contexts that predate known metallurgy by tens of thousands of years. Each of these discoveries was documented at the time. Photographs were taken, measurements were recorded, witnesses provided testimony. Yet somehow, the physical evidence disappeared. The documentation was lost. The witnesses were discredited or forgotten. What should have been paradigm-shifting discoveries became footnotes in obscure journals, dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. The pattern suggests that our institutions have developed sophisticated mechanisms for filtering out information that doesn't conform to accepted narratives. These mechanisms don't require conscious conspiracy. They operate through the normal processes of academic peer review, museum curation policies, and media editorial decisions. Evidence that supports established theories gets preserved and publicized. Evidence that challenges those theories gets buried in bureaucratic processes designed to avoid controversy. The digital age has made this suppression both easier and more visible. Information can be deleted from databases with a few keystrokes. Online discussions can be moderated to remove inconvenient questions. Search algorithms can be adjusted to deprioritize controversial content. Yet the same technologies also make it possible to preserve and share information in ways that were impossible in previous eras. This creates a strange dynamic where evidence of suppression becomes more apparent, even as the suppression itself becomes more sophisticated. Researchers can document how their work disappears from search results. Whistleblowers can preserve copies of documents before they're officially deleted. Independent investigators can maintain archives of suppressed information beyond the reach of institutional control. The result is a growing body of evidence that suggests systematic suppression of discoveries that challenge established narratives about human history. This evidence exists in parallel to official academic discourse, accessible to those willing to look for it, but invisible to those who rely on conventional sources of information. The suppression extends beyond individual discoveries to entire categories of investigation. Funding agencies consistently reject proposals to search for evidence of earlier civilizations. Academic journals refuse to publish research that challenges established timelines. University departments discourage students from pursuing thesis topics that might yield controversial results. The message is clear. Some questions are not supposed to be asked. Some possibilities are not supposed to be investigated. Some evidence is not supposed to be taken seriously, regardless of its potential significance. This institutional resistance reveals something profound about how knowledge institutions actually function in our society. They're not neutral seekers of truth as they present themselves. They're guardians of established narratives, protecting certain interpretations of reality from challenge or revision. The protection operates through multiple layers of filtering. Research proposals must pass review committees that favor conventional approaches. Study results must satisfy peer reviewers who are committed to existing paradigms. Publications must meet editorial standards that discourage controversial conclusions. Career advancement depends on conformity to departmental norms that prioritize incremental additions to accepted knowledge over fundamental challenges to basic assumptions. Each layer of filtering removes evidence and interpretations that don't conform to established narratives. The process is gradual and seemingly reasonable at each step, but the cumulative effect is the systematic exclusion of anything that might require major revisions to our understanding of human development. The consequences extend far beyond academic archaeology. If advanced civilizations did exist before us, if they developed sustainable technologies and social systems, if they learned from their mistakes and preserved crucial knowledge for future generations, then understanding their achievements could provide essential guidance for our own civilization. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming the institutional mechanisms that prevent serious investigation of these possibilities. It means finding ways to fund research that challenges established narratives. It means creating publication venues that welcome controversial discoveries. It means developing career paths that reward revolutionary thinking rather than conformist incremental work. Most importantly, it means recognizing that the resistance to these investigations isn't just academic inertia. It's a fundamental conflict between the pursuit of truth and the protection of comfortable illusions about human uniqueness and continuous progress. The evidence for systematic suppression continues to accumulate in forms that become increasingly difficult to ignore. Researchers document how their funding gets cut when their work yields unexpected results. Whistleblowers reveal how inconvenient discoveries get buried in bureaucratic processes. Independent investigators uncover patterns of evidence destruction that extend across multiple institutions and time periods. The pattern suggests that we're not dealing with isolated incidents of academic conservatism, but with systematic mechanisms designed to prevent certain kinds of knowledge from reaching public attention. These mechanisms operate through the normal processes of institutional management, making them nearly invisible to casual observation, while remaining highly effective at filtering out unwanted information. The implications are staggering. If these suppression mechanisms have been operating for decades or centuries, how much potentially crucial information about our past has been lost or hidden? How many discoveries that could have revolutionized our understanding of human capabilities have been buried in storage facilities or destroyed outright? The questions become even more pressing when we consider the urgency of our current situation. We face environmental challenges, resource constraints, and social instabilities that threaten the survival of our civilization. Understanding how earlier societies dealt with similar challenges could provide essential insights into sustainable development and long-term planning. But if evidence of those earlier societies is being systematically suppressed, if research into their achievements is being actively discouraged, if knowledge of their successes and failures is being kept from public attention, then we're being denied access to information that could be crucial for our survival. The suppression isn't just an academic issue. It's a matter of civilizational importance. The knowledge that's being hidden or destroyed might contain the keys to solving problems that could determine whether our own society survives and flourishes or follows the same path to collapse that may have claimed earlier civilizations. The investigation of these suppression mechanisms requires new approaches that bypass traditional institutional channels. Independent researchers, crowd-funded investigations, and alternative publication platforms offer ways to pursue controversial research without depending on the approval of established institutions. The internet provides tools for preserving and sharing information that can't be easily suppressed through conventional means. Blockchain technologies offer ways to create permanent, tamper-proof records of discoveries and evidence. Decentralized networks make it possible to maintain archives beyond the reach of institutional control. But technology alone isn't sufficient. The investigation also requires individuals with the courage to pursue uncomfortable truths despite professional risks. It needs researchers willing to sacrifice career advancement for intellectual integrity. It demands investigators who value knowledge more than institutional approval. Most importantly, it requires a broader public awakening to the reality that our knowledge institutions aren't neutral seekers of truth, but active filters that shape what we're allowed to know about our own history and potential. The evidence for systematic suppression is there, waiting in storage facilities, buried in bureaucratic archives, preserved in the memories of researchers who were discouraged from pursuing their most important discoveries. The question isn't whether suppression is occurring, but whether we have the courage to acknowledge its existence and work to overcome it. The stakes couldn't be higher. The knowledge that's being suppressed might be the key to understanding who we really are, where we actually came from, and what we might be capable of achieving if we can learn from the full breadth of human experience across all the cycles of development and decline that have shaped our species. The investigation continues, despite institutional resistance, funding challenges, and career risks. Each new piece of evidence adds to a growing body of knowledge that exists parallel to official narratives, accessible to those willing to look beyond conventional sources, invisible to those who rely solely on established institutions for information about our past. The search for suppressed evidence becomes inseparable from the search for evidence of earlier civilizations. Both investigations face the same obstacles, encounter the same resistance, and promise the same potential rewards: a more complete understanding of human history and human potential. The questions multiply as the investigation deepens. How long has this suppression been occurring? How much crucial information has been lost? What knowledge might still be recoverable if we can overcome the mechanisms that keep it hidden? And perhaps most importantly, what does the very existence of these suppression mechanisms tell us about the significance of what they're designed to conceal? The answers may be more extraordinary than we've dared to imagine. The evidence suggests not just isolated incidents of institutional conservatism, but systematic efforts to maintain particular narratives about human development at the expense of potentially revolutionary discoveries about our past and our capabilities. The investigation of both suppression and earlier civilizations continues in parallel, each line of inquiry reinforcing the other, each discovery adding weight to the possibility that our understanding of human history is not just incomplete, but actively distorted by forces that have a vested interest in maintaining certain interpretations of our past. The truth about our history may be far stranger and more significant than we've been allowed to know. The evidence for both earlier civilizations and their systematic suppression continues to accumulate, waiting for the moment when the weight of discovery becomes too great for institutional resistance to contain. That moment may be approaching faster than the guardians of established narratives realize. The tools for investigation continue to improve. The means for preserving and sharing information continue to expand, and the number of researchers willing to pursue uncomfortable truths continues to grow. The investigation of our hidden past proceeds despite all obstacles, driven by the recognition that understanding who we really are and what we're truly capable of may be essential for navigating the challenges that lie ahead. The search for truth continues, and the most important revelations may still await us in the places we haven't yet found the courage to explore seriously. The convergence of all these threads leads us to perhaps the most unsettling realization of all. We are not investigating ancient history in isolation. We are documenting a pattern that is actively repeating itself in our own time, a cycle of achievement and concealment that may be as old as consciousness itself. Consider the strange synchronicity of our current moment. We live in an age of unprecedented technological advancement, yet also unprecedented secrecy about the true extent of human capabilities. Military contractors develop technologies decades ahead of public knowledge. Corporate research laboratories pursue projects that remain classified long after their completion. Government agencies conduct experiments that won't be declassified for generations, if ever. The pattern mirrors exactly what we've observed in our investigation of ancient suppression. Revolutionary discoveries are made, documented, and then buried in classification systems designed to prevent public access. The technologies exist, the knowledge is real, but it remains locked away from the very civilization that created it. This creates a disturbing parallel between our search for evidence of earlier civilizations and our contemporary experience of technological development. In both cases, we find tantalizing hints of capabilities that exceed official acknowledgement. In both cases, evidence appears and then disappears into institutional black holes. In both cases, the full scope of human achievement remains hidden from public view. The implications are staggering. If advanced technologies are being developed and suppressed in our own time, how can we be certain that similar processes weren't operating in earlier periods? If our contemporary institutions systematically conceal breakthrough discoveries, what makes us think that ancient institutions were any different? The cycle of development and concealment may be a fundamental characteristic of how human societies handle revolutionary knowledge. Perhaps every civilization that reaches a certain level of sophistication develops the same institutional mechanisms for controlling information that might destabilize existing power structures. Perhaps the suppression we're documenting isn't an aberration, but a predictable feature of advanced social organization. This perspective transforms how we understand the evidence for earlier civilizations. The gaps in the archaeological record, the disappearance of anomalous artifacts, the institutional resistance to investigating unconventional possibilities. These might not be accidental consequences of academic conservatism. They might be the deliberate result of suppression mechanisms that operate across civilizational cycles. If this interpretation is correct, then the search for evidence of earlier civilizations becomes inseparable from understanding how knowledge gets preserved and concealed across vast time periods. The same forces that hide contemporary breakthrough discoveries might have been hiding ancient achievements for thousands or millions of years. The evidence suggests that human societies develop sophisticated methods for maintaining public narratives while concealing information that might challenge those narratives. These methods operate through multiple layers of institutional filtering, creating the appearance of open inquiry, while systematically excluding discoveries that don't conform to established frameworks. But the concealment isn't perfect. Evidence leaks through the filters in various forms. Anomalous artifacts that don't fit conventional timelines, traditional knowledge systems that preserve information thought to be lost, underwater formations that suggest construction activities in periods when such activities weren't supposed to occur. Each leak provides a glimpse of knowledge that exists beyond official acknowledgement. Taken individually, these glimpses can be dismissed as measurement errors, misinterpretations, or coincidences. Taken collectively, they suggest vast bodies of concealed information about human capabilities and historical development. The pattern extends beyond archaeology into every field where breakthrough discoveries might challenge fundamental assumptions about reality. Physics laboratories report experimental results that can't be explained by accepted theories, then classify the research to prevent public discussion. Medical researchers discover treatments that exceed the effectiveness of approved therapies, then find their work suppressed by regulatory agencies. Energy companies develop technologies that could revolutionize power generation, then bury the patents in legal structures designed to prevent implementation. In each case, the suppression operates through seemingly reasonable institutional processes. National security considerations justify classification of physics research. Safety concerns explain regulatory rejection of medical innovations. Economic factors account for the shelving of energy technologies. The mechanisms are different, but the result is the same. Revolutionary discoveries disappear from public knowledge. This contemporary suppression provides a template for understanding how similar processes might have operated in earlier periods. Ancient priesthoods, royal courts, and secret societies could have used analogous methods to control access to knowledge that might threaten their authority. The specific mechanisms would have been different, but the underlying logic would have been identical. Preserve public narratives while concealing information that might destabilize existing power structures. The realization forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of human knowledge and social organization. How much of what we think we know about reality is actually filtered through institutional mechanisms designed to maintain particular interpretations? How much genuine knowledge remains hidden behind classification systems, corporate secrets, and academic taboos? If suppression mechanisms operate consistently across civilizational cycles, then the official version of human history might be systematically distorted. The narrative of steady progress from primitive origins might be a construction designed to maintain certain beliefs about development and capability, while the evidence for more complex patterns of achievement and decline remains locked away from public access. This doesn't require conscious conspiracy. The suppression can operate through the ordinary mechanisms of institutional self-preservation, career protection, and bureaucratic inertia. Everyone involved can have perfectly reasonable justifications for their individual decisions, The cumulative effect, however, is the systematic concealment of information that might revolutionize our understanding of human potential. The pattern suggests that we're not just investigating ancient history. We're documenting ongoing processes that continue to shape what we're allowed to know about our own capabilities and development. The search for evidence of earlier civilizations becomes inseparable from understanding how knowledge gets managed and controlled in contemporary society. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If revolutionary knowledge is being systematically concealed, if breakthrough discoveries are being buried in classification systems, if evidence of human potential is being filtered out of public discourse, then we're being denied access to information that could be crucial for addressing contemporary challenges. The technologies and knowledge systems that could solve our energy problems, heal our environmental damage, or enable sustainable development might already exist, locked away in corporate laboratories or government archives. The wisdom that could help us avoid the mistakes that destroyed earlier civilizations might be preserved in suppressed research or classified historical investigations. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming the same institutional mechanisms that have kept it hidden. The challenge isn't just technical or financial, it's fundamentally political and psychological. It requires confronting power structures that have invested enormous resources in maintaining particular narratives about reality and human development. The investigation reveals that the search for truth about our past is inseparable from the struggle for truth about our present. The forces that conceal evidence of earlier civilizations are the same forces that conceal breakthrough discoveries in contemporary research. The mechanisms that filter out anomalous archaeological evidence are the same mechanisms that filter out revolutionary scientific findings. Understanding this connection transforms the investigation from a historical curiosity into an urgent contemporary challenge. The knowledge we're seeking about earlier civilizations isn't just academic information about the past. It's practical wisdom that could inform our responses to current crises and future challenges. But the knowledge remains locked away behind institutional barriers that operate across time periods and civilizational cycles. Breaking through these barriers requires new approaches that bypass conventional channels, new methods that circumvent established filters, and new forms of organization that can preserve and share information beyond the reach of suppression mechanisms. The investigation continues despite all obstacles, driven by the recognition that understanding the full scope of human knowledge and capability may be essential for our survival as a species. The evidence accumulates in hidden archives and suppressed research, in anomalous discoveries and classified projects, in traditional wisdom and contemporary breakthroughs that never reach public attention. Each piece of evidence adds weight to the possibility that human civilization is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more cyclical than we've been allowed to know. The story we tell ourselves about progress and development may be a carefully constructed narrative designed to conceal the true extent of human achievement and the genuine patterns of historical change. The truth about our past and our potential may be stranger and more significant than we've imagined. The evidence suggests not just isolated instances of advanced ancient capabilities, but systematic concealment of knowledge that spans civilizational cycles and continues to operate in our own time. The investigation of earlier civilizations thus becomes a quest for liberation from the information control systems that have shaped human consciousness for thousands of years. Understanding how these systems operate, how they preserve certain narratives while suppressing others, how they maintain their authority across generational boundaries, may be the key to finally accessing the full breadth of human knowledge and experience. The search continues in hidden archives and classified projects, in suppressed research and anomalous discoveries, in the preserved wisdom of traditional cultures and the breakthrough findings of contemporary investigators willing to risk their careers for truth. Each revelation brings us closer to understanding not just what earlier civilizations achieved, but why that knowledge has been kept from us, and how we might finally reclaim our complete heritage as a species capable of far more than we've been allowed to believe. The pattern of concealment and revelation, of achievement and suppression, of discovery and disappearance may be the most important pattern in human history. Understanding it fully could unlock not just our past, but our future potential as well. The investigation continues, and the most significant revelations may still lie ahead, waiting for the moment when the weight of evidence becomes too great for even the most sophisticated suppression mechanisms to contain. So here we stand, at the end of a journey that has taken us through layers of time deeper than most dare to venture, through questions that make institutions uncomfortable and evidence that challenges everything we thought we knew about our place in the grand story of human development. We've traced the threads of anomalous discoveries, examined the patterns of institutional resistance, and uncovered the mechanisms by which revolutionary knowledge disappears into the shadows of suppression and selective forgetting. What emerges from this investigation is not a simple answer, but a profound shift in perspective. We are not the first advanced civilization to walk this earth. The evidence, fragmentary and often obscured though it may be, points to cycles of human achievement that stretch back far beyond our recorded history. The precision-cut stones, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge, the advanced metallurgy appearing in contexts that predate our supposed development of such capabilities, the underwater formations that suggest construction during periods when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today. All of this forms a pattern too consistent to dismiss as coincidence or misinterpretation. But perhaps more unsettling than the possibility of earlier civilizations is the realization of how systematically evidence of their existence has been filtered out of our understanding. The same institutional mechanisms that bury anomalous archaeological discoveries today have been operating across civilizational cycles, creating a kind of historical amnesia that serves to maintain particular narratives about human uniqueness and continuous progress. We live in a world where breakthrough technologies are classified, where revolutionary discoveries disappear into corporate archives, where evidence that challenges established paradigms faces systematic suppression through the ordinary mechanisms of academic peer review, funding decisions, and career considerations. If this is happening now, in our age of supposed transparency and open inquiry, how much more thoroughly might similar processes have operated in earlier periods? The investigation reveals that we are not just studying the past, we are documenting ongoing patterns that continue to shape what we're allowed to know about our own capabilities and potential. The search for earlier civilizations becomes inseparable from understanding how knowledge gets preserved and concealed across vast spans of time. How certain truths survive while others vanish into institutional black holes. The implications extend far beyond academic archaeology. If advanced societies did rise and fall before us, if they developed sustainable technologies and social systems, if they learned to work within planetary boundaries rather than constantly expanding beyond them, then their wisdom could provide crucial guidance for navigating our own challenges. But accessing that wisdom requires overcoming the same barriers that have kept it hidden, the same resistance that continues to suppress breakthrough discoveries in our own time. The journey through deep time becomes a journey into present possibilities. Understanding the full scope of human achievement across all the cycles of development and loss that have shaped our species could provide the perspective we need to ensure our own civilization doesn't join the ranks of those that rose to great heights, only to be forgotten by the societies that came after. The questions we've explored tonight don't have easy answers, and perhaps that's exactly the point. If human history is more complex, more mysterious, and more cyclical than we've assumed, then the investigation of our past becomes not just academic curiosity, but essential preparation for whatever lies ahead. The evidence continues to accumulate, the patterns become clearer, and the resistance grows more desperate to maintain narratives that may no longer be sustainable. The truth about our past may be stranger and more significant than we've been allowed to know, but it may also be exactly what we need to understand our present situation and shape our future wisely. The search continues, and the most important revelations may still await us in the depths we haven't yet explored, the questions we haven't yet asked, the possibilities we haven't yet found the courage to consider seriously. Until next time, keep questioning what you've been taught, keep looking beyond the comfortable narratives, and remember that the greatest discoveries often lie not in what we're told to see, but in what we're told to ignore. This is Before Law, where forgotten truths meet the courage to question everything. Sleep well, fellow seekers of the hidden past.